Okay, good to know. I brought the colada. For those of us who are here from Texas, this is how we drink our Cuban coffee in the morning.
Oh, nice. Okay. I got this deal. Also a glass.
That's the same size mug as that guy over in the FCC. Okay, it is Monday, which is not the normal day that we usually broadcast, but we usually broadcast on Sunday, so this must be something special. And in fact, it is, because right now, all eyes are on Florida, in part because of the fact that we just had done what had not been done before in the state of Florida, and that is to actually get through the process of having a petition sent through for adult use cannabis. And it actually did pass Supreme Court muster. And in part, it was because of this guy right here, and we're going to be talking to him in just a minute on the location.
I maybe that was a preemptive clap.
Play the theme music.
Did I do the intros all wrong? Did I do that
No,
wrong?
you did just fine. I just wonder if I got cut off in the middle of my preemptive clap joke. But we'll work on that later on. Good morning. I am your political director here at Suncoast Normal, Gary Stein, and our master of public health. Now you can do the preemptive clap.
Ah.
Close enough. Get that audience, beat them out the window. And on the lower side here on your left is our deputy director, our master of business administration, Carlos Angel Armada.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you.
And I pronounced that wrong on purpose just to see if he would correct me, and he didn't, so he must have done his bad. And above him is our executive director, coming to us from beautiful Anne Arundel County in Maryland. And he's in the Beltway where he shoots them and hits them below the Beltway. Our executive director, Christopher Cano.
Thank you.
Also, he's going to be a poppy soon.
Indeed. Looking forward to it.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
Yeah. Now, the best way to do it, of course, is to have the wife go through labor on Labor Day. That would make perfect sense. But
no, probably Memorial Day for mine. So we'll, but at least it'll be a long weekend.
Oh, you can't hold her off the whole summer? Anyway, and down below here we have our very special guest, Attorney John Bash. Now, I could go over his resume, but we only have an hour. Suffice to say that along with being a lawyer, head of the appellate division in his firm, he also was working for the Department of Justice, was a federal attorney for the western half of Texas, and also, because he had a weekend off, he came to Florida and pled in front of the Supreme Court to see if they could get the ballot initiative for adult use go through. And remarkably, where so many others had failed, this one went through. So there, you can go ahead and throw an applause in there.
Indeed.
That's ambivalent, isn't it? Morning, John. Thank you for coming here, and thank you for expounding us with our knowledge, because we have a lot of people out here who really do not understand the amendment, even though it's in clear language. But let me first ask you this quick question. You had 3 tests you had to pass as far as this amendment is concerned. First, we had to make certain that it was a single subject. And I guess it only works on certain bills, because 2 years ago we had dual amendments, amendments that had vaping and land use. Is that what it was? On the same bill? You had to vote for both or none? Anyways, so it has to be single segment. The summary has to be clear enough for the voter to understand, and it has to be constitutional as of the federal U.S. Constitution, correct?
Correct. And that last one's a new requirement, and the Supreme Court has not actually applied it yet, but it does have to be non-federally unconstitutional.
Why the federal Constitution, not the state constitution?
It's not the state constitution because these ballot initiatives are amending the constitution. So they don't need to comply with the constitution because they're changing it. Just like we could amend the federal constitution if we wanted to repeal one of the amendments, or as we did with prohibition, we repealed the amendment prohibiting alcohol. An amendment to the state constitution does not itself need to comply with the state constitution, except that it's got to follow the right procedures. But federal law trumps state law if the federal law is valid. So a state constitutional provision, let's say a state constitutional provision said nobody anywhere can have a gun. That would probably be preempted by the federal Second Amendment. So that's why they've added that requirement. The interesting thing in this case is state laws are also preempted by federal statutes. So if a state, even if you passed an amendment to the state constitution that says something like anti-competitive conduct is totally fine, it's totally protected, well, that would be preempted by the federal antitrust laws. But a question in this case was, well, what about if the Controlled Substances Act at the federal level preempts this amendment? And one objector argued that. And we sort of suggested to the court, well, that's not really what this provision means. It's not talking about preemption by statute. The court thought that was an interesting question, but ultimately agreed there was no issue there. In fact, the U.S. Supreme Court did us a solid in a totally unrelated case about the double jeopardy clause, written by Justice Alito, of all people, who my wife clerked for, who's very conservative and very law and order. He just gave a hypothetical example of how a state could legalize marijuana, even if the federal government continued to prohibit it. And that was totally fine. And so even though it was what we call dicta, meaning a kind of gratuitous statement that didn't have anything to do with the merits, we were able to use that to our advantage in the case to say, come on, the Supreme Court has already recognized unanimously, pretty much, that states can legalize marijuana even if it continues to be illegal at the federal level. So that was actually very helpful to us on that issue.
It must be an interesting household. You clerked for Scalia.
I did, yes.
Your wife clerked for Alito. So she's the next generation, essentially.
Yeah, I mean, we're only 6 months apart, but she clerked about 6 years after me. Although Justice Alito was on the court when I was clerking. He had been on the court for a little while when I clerked, maybe 3 or 4 years.
Okay. In regards to clarity, what is the standard? What threshold do you have to breach to make certain that it is understandable to the average voter? Because the average voter is very monolithic.
Yeah,
they spend from being unable to read to being unable to see, unable to hear, etc.
Yeah, it's a very nebulous standard. So there's really 3 things going on. One, they assume that voters are well informed. So even if you take the view, hey, voters don't know anything when they get to the ballot, they don't pay attention. I don't think that's true. But even if you take that view, that's not what the Florida Supreme Court says. Their view is voters are reasonably informed. One example is that there was a ballot amendment proposed about something about secondhand smoking. And the court said, we assume voters are aware that smoking is generally prohibited in certain sorts of places like restaurants and so forth. Like, you don't have to pretend this person is a Martian who comes in here and knows nothing about the world. So they assume a certain degree of general knowledge by voters. They assume a general understanding of the law, although not apparently the difference between federal and state law, which was the big issue in this case. But they assume a general understanding of the law. The second thing is there's 2 ways that the amendment summary can't be misleading. One, it must disclose the chief purpose of the amendment. So in our case, we thought the chief purpose is to allow adults to use marijuana personally without being exposed to criminal or civil penalties at the state level. That was the chief purpose in our view. And so there were a lot of other things going on in the amendment about the licensing scheme and who's going to regulate. And we said, well, none of that's the chief purpose. You only have 75 words to do this. And if you had to do more than the chief purpose, you'd run out of words pretty quickly. The other thing it's got to do is not be affirmatively misleading. So although you don't have to talk about things that aren't the chief purpose, you can't say something about them that's misleading. And that, I think, is where some of the other amendments failed in the Florida Supreme Court's view. The third piece of this, and I think it's really important, and it was very telling that the Solicitor General and the Attorney General tried to kind of run away from this a little bit, which is that the Florida Supreme Court owes great deference to these amendments. So it's a high presumption to strike one from the ballot. And I think that makes sense because, as I said, in 75 words for a even moderately interesting amendment, you're always going to miss something. There's always some phrase that a good lawyer can come in and say, well, that's misleading. What about this? What about that? I mean, there's no way you can draft that perfectly. And so if they didn't give deference to it, they'd be striking down these things left and right. Now, the Solicitor General said with some force that, well, why should you owe any deference to this? This, of course, we defer to the people's right to amend the Constitution, but this is about whether they're being misled in what they're doing. So why should there be any deference to the summary? And that has some purchase, but to me, I just come back to the fact that this is a constitutional procedure. You're supposed to be allowed to do this. And if there was really withering scrutiny of all of these, none of these would ever pass muster, because you can always come up with some problem with 75 words. So anyway, that's the lay of the land on the misleading piece, which is different than the first thing you raised, which is whether it violates the federal Constitution.
Now, and we talked about 75 words, but I've seen enough of these hearings to know sometimes it actually comes down to just one word out of those 75 that can make all the difference in regards to the meaning of almost the entire sentence. Kind of reminds me of the German language, where you can have a sentence that's about 45 words long and have no at the end of it, and all of a sudden it changes everything before that. Well, we have that one piece where it talks about who is going to be able to sell this. And it mentions the fact that a medical marijuana treatment or other state licensed entity, including its agents and employees acting in concussion, as it relates to acquiring, cultivating, processing, manufacturing, selling, and distributing products. Now, the big thing over here was the fact whether you use the word or and makes a difference whether it can be a horizontal situation where it can do one piece of the puzzle, or it has to be a vertical integration, or it has to be able to do all these things. And this amendment, as it's written, uses the word and. Now, does that mean that anybody who becomes licensed to sell this adult use fashion has to be vertically integrated?
I confess I have not studied that issue. So that is from the text of the amendment, not from the text of the summary. And most of our argument about, is the summary misleading? Now that interacts with the text in that the Solicitor General on a couple issues said, well, the text says X and your summary implies Y. But this issue did not come up in that direct way. So I confess I haven't studied the text of that to really have a good answer on that. I wouldn't want to, especially since I represented the sponsor, wouldn't want to just speak off the cuff and all of a sudden their lawyer is saying it means X or Y, and I really don't know.
I'm not going to try to get you in trouble, but I am interested in knowing how somebody as powerful you would. Go ahead.
The concern is that local kind of mom and pop retailers wouldn't be able to be in business because you'd have to have this fully vertically integrated operation to get a license.
Well, that's the current status of that. Now, with this "and" clause in it, that kind of feels like to some folks this leaves the door open for the state to license non-vertically integrated businesses to allow to get into the industry, and that's really the question that a lot of folks are holding their breath on. Of whether or not voting yes or no on this amendment, because there is around 10,000 licensed or permitted hemp businesses in the state who are folks that are in the hemp industry simply because they did not have the opportunity to get into the vertically integrated medical marijuana industry in Florida.
I know that one aspect of the amendment is it does give the legislature pretty broad licensing authority. I mean, it says MMTCs have to be licensed, but then it leaves other licensing decisions up to the state legislature. So I don't want to judge that question because I really haven't studied the language you're talking about, but I think you could probably take comfort in the fact that the legislature has pretty broad licensing discretion. This came up with some remarks from the governor about, well, I don't want to smell a bunch of marijuana smoke when I'm walking my kids to school or whatever. And as we said, I wrote a little op-ed responding to it with Glenn Burhans, who was my co-counsel. And as I said there, this gives the legislature very broad discretion. The legislature already has a lot of authority to regulate tobacco use in public, alcohol use in public, and we don't see this amendment as changing that baseline of authority to regulate public consumption under the ordinary kind of reasons that legislatures regulate that kind of thing. This protects your right to use it in your home and whatever else the legislature wants to authorize, in my view.
But for public use, the laws will stay the same. That hasn't changed, where you have to be in a public facility, a private facility where you have, or a place where you have permission to utilize this product by the person who owns that product, the landlord, etc. Right?
Yeah, I don't know the current state of statutory law on those issues, but I don't think this amendment purports to displace the legislature's authority to enact those kind of laws.
So is this an immunity situation or is this a freedom situation? Is this going to allow people to purchase it anywhere and smoke it anywhere, or will it be a matter of you won't get arrested if you do it?
Well, I mean, I guess I see those as two sides of the same coin. I mean, it says you can't have any civil or criminal penalties for engaging in the conduct protected by the amendment. So, I mean, it creates a freedom by creating an immunity. It says you can't be penalized for it. And so that includes civil penalties. So, yeah, the conduct permitted by the amendment and protected, I think it's establishing a new freedom as a matter of Florida constitutional law. Now, obviously, the issue that hung over this case, and one that everybody should be aware of, is that it can't change federal law. And in theory, everybody is subject to federal criminal prosecution for trafficking in marijuana, for using and possessing marijuana. Now, I think, as you all probably know better than I do, in general, over the last decade or so, the federal government has not really gone after people who are in compliance with state laws. I expect that will continue, but it's always possible that it doesn't, and people should understand that too.
Well, you bring up a great point about the federal law, John, because in Florida, we have a large, resident population, non-citizen immigrant population. When folks go to get their green cards, they're subject to federal law. So, if you end up with a police interaction, even if you get out of it, because you're legally abiding by state law, you're still in violation of federal law. That could risk you getting your citizenship. So I do want folks to pay attention and be cautioned as to this, the whole issue of marijuana with the crux of it not being legal federally, but being legal at the state level.
Absolutely. And I think that's something, if you're an immigrant and you're looking to work towards citizenship, you should probably talk to your immigration lawyer about whether you want to be using marijuana while you're in that process, because even if it's not a big deal right now, we may have an administration coming in who is much more hardline on immigration, and they may change a policy that's enacted right now or a default prosecution or enforcement policy. And so you probably want to talk to your lawyer before you do that if you're working towards citizenship.
Now, let's be clear about one talking point that I heard from somebody else today, that the other side, whichever that side is going to be bringing in tens of thousands of undocumented immigrants, flooding the state of Florida and voting for the amendment. Just so we can be clear here, non-citizens cannot vote for this amendment. No way, no how, ever.
Gary, what idiot politician said that there's undocumented immigrants going to be voting in Florida? I'm just call it out, please, because it hurts my brain to hear these things.
Oh, just keep your ears out. You'll hear it more than once. It seems to be a talking point that's spreading right now.
John, you don't have to entertain that political talking point. You're professional, my friend.
One thing I would say is that if that was a scheme that was even feasible, it'd be surprising that this would be the first time they would do it. I mean, you think they would have just employed that for the gubernatorial race, the ordinary elections that have occurred. Maybe people think that's happened. But this doesn't seem, I'm a conservative Republican, but this issue does not seem like an issue it seems more generational to me, put it that way, than it does political. I'm sure Democrats poll higher on legalization, but I don't think Republicans poll that low either. No. And I think it's more of a generational thing that will change over time. Most conservatives I know don't see this as a major issue for them. They list about 40 or 50, even if they're opposed, they list 40 or 50 other issues that are more important to them than this. I think a lot of progressives do list it high as an important issue for them. So I think the tide's changing. I think it's a generational issue, and I hope it's not going to be politically polarizing going forward.
Well, I'm glad you said that, because, this is not an issue of red or blue. It's an issue of American freedom. It's an issue that, a beneficial plant has been criminalized in this country for close to a century now. And as you said, for some people politically, it's targeted large members of their base. And for other folks, not so much. But the fact is that 88% of Americans polled do not support the criminalization of marijuana, and a majority of both Republicans and Democrats across all political spectrums support, not having criminal penalties for marijuana possession. So there is definitely the opportunity there for some type of bipartisanship. It's a shame that we don't see more issues with bipartisanship that folks can agree on in such a polarized political environment that we have today. But this is one of the few, I think, that folks can agree on. I mean, there's another issue on the ballot in Florida, which is very polarizing, and it has been a wedge issue in this country for 40 years with Amendment 4 and whether or not, reproductive rights and women's health care around abortion is going to be enshrined into the Constitution. So we'll see, where the chips fall between these two amendments. But one of the things that I've said from the get-go is that these are going to drive turnout one way or the other. These are issues that people get excited about anytime they're on the ballot in other states. And Florida, being has always been a bellwether state, but recently has shifted right with a lot of folks retiring to Florida from California and New York who don't want to pay those tax rates. And so Florida has a larger shift to the red right now. But this could be an issue that could swing the pendulum and make Florida a purple state again. I'm just interested to see, will these voters turn out for this? And one of the things that I'm seeing is that folks in the marijuana advocacy sector really, are split on the amendment, in the sense that there are some folks who are like, yes, we finally got the opportunity to, take the first step towards any prohibition. And other folks are like, well, this amendment, is only going to benefit a certain amount of people, financially. And that's a lot of concern for folks. And that's one of the reasons why we wanted to put this workshop on today as well. I put together some slides and some other things we'll go over later in the presentation. But, I know we have you for a limited time. You're a very busy man. But I just wanted to thank you for coming on today and sharing your thoughts with us. Carlos, man, I wanted to hear from you. You're always the non-political one out of all of us. So what questions do you have for John or just insights that you wanted to share on the amendment?
I don't really have any questions for John, but you guys all know my concern. You guys know that, I want to work in the industry, and essentially this would block out me from doing so, at least at the time being. And I understand that this puts a lot of control over that in the legislator. And that's exactly what I'm scared about. I don't think the legislator wants me in the industry anytime soon. They want to keep this a closed industry. So that's a concern. But I mean, what can you do? What can you do? We had the Regulate Florida initiative that got turned down for having growing in it, and not attacking the single subject rule. And, it seems like if we're going to play the game of Florida politics, we're going to end up having to give up a lot in order to just make sure that people don't get arrested for marijuana usage.
It seems like, I don't know how this is all going to shake out with those issues, but it seems like from your perspective, any legalization should be better. Because for one thing, and I mean legalization as a matter of Florida law, not federal law. But for one thing, if people see there aren't the kind of harms associated with that opponents say, that I think opens up opportunities for other legislation in the future, because legislators and people who are skeptical may see, look, this isn't a problem, and now let's try to perfect the system or make it better or make it more competitive or whatever the concerns are. I'm not a Floridian, I'm not voting in it, but it seems like if you're for legalization, getting a foot in the door is better than nothing.
Yeah, that's where I'm at, and you got to understand, John, that I come from how long have we opened this chapter for? We're 10 years in the game now.
Yeah, 10 decade. Yeah.
We're 10 years of trying to get marijuana legalized in Florida, and that's 10 years of baby steps and getting pushed back. And I understand people's frustration when they see that this is a truly led initiative. And that, the concern is it protects the oligarchy, or however you say that word. But as much as I am a bleeding heart activist and I want everything to be exactly the way I want it to be, I, I just have to just take solace in the fact that 3 ounces, up to 3 ounces, people won't get arrested for that anymore. And maybe that step in the right direction will do exactly what you said. Maybe that will help, where for lack of a better term here, sorry to be unprofessional here, John, but maybe that'll make these really conservative older Republicans a little less tight butthole about the situation. And
That's
and,
approved
and
term, by the way.
and maybe one day a guy like Carlos Ramita will be able to own a dispensary and help people with cannabis the way this plant should be, and free and loving and blah blah blah. But unfortunately, that's not where we live.
That's a lot of young people that won't have a criminal offense on their record, which even if you're not serving time, and I don't think a lot of people for simple possession serve time. I might be wrong about that in Florida, but my experience, they don't. But
we got some
criminal record is something you have to disclose. It can block you from getting certain jobs. It can block you from opportunities. And even if there are other aspects of the amendment you think could be changed or improved, I mean, that's a big deal to not have young people, especially, getting their lives changed with a criminal record.
Imagine how it would feel. Like, I just don't want to be in that situation where I take a staunch stance against this amendment, and then all of a sudden, I get arrested for carrying my card expires, and I'm found with marijuana illegally, or one of my employees gets arrested for having marijuana or something like that, or a young family member gets arrested. How would I feel if I took a staunch, I'm the marijuana activist here, and I take a staunch approach against that? I'm gonna feel like shit. I don't want people to go through the system. We were talking in the show yesterday. Myself and Kano have been through the system. The system's bullshit when it comes to marijuana. It's nothing but taking your money, making you feel like a drug addict, making you feel like shit. And we have the opportunity to end that. So as much as I want to run to the finish line, I mean, at least we're taking a step towards the finish line.
Well, Carlos, in talking about steps, John, you've argued before the Supreme Court now successfully. Do you feel as though future amendment and ballot amendment initiatives will get the same shake, or was this a moment in time only? Was this the narrow window to get this through? Could we in 2 or 4 years put up a ballot amendment to grow at home, or put up a ballot amendment to open up retail sales and dismantle vertical integration? Because in Florida, the issue that we've had is oftentimes the elected politicians are out of touch with the voters, even with their base. Carlos made a comment about old Republicans, but there are some very liberal old Republicans in the villages smoking weed right now, but it's the elected officials that have that disconnect. And so the people have had to legislate through ballot initiative on behalf of the legislature to do everything from end gerrymandered, districts, to protect the environment, to give civil rights back to people who have served their time in society. And this is just one more issue that the people have had to legislate and do the legislators' job for them. So, I just want to turn it over to you with these hoops that you mentioned earlier, as far as, the federal constitution. And then also, we know the legislature has even wanted to increase the threshold for future initiatives. Was this a moment in time, or can the people be hopeful that we can get future ballot initiatives before the current Supreme Court?
Well, I don't know about the process of getting enough signatures and whether the legislature is going to raise the requirements, but in terms of the Florida Supreme Court, I found them very principled and very nonpartisan, even though I think they're probably all Republican appointees, or maybe all but one. Mm-hmm. And Justice Kennedy, who I think is the second most senior justice there, and is very conservative. When the government got up and said this is going to mislead people about whether it's going to be legal under federal law, even though the summary says applies to Florida law, does not immunize violations of federal law, he just said, "I'm baffled by your argument." How could that? I mean, it literally says the opposite of what you're saying. And so I found the court to be extremely principled. I don't know, but I suspect that most of them are not in favor of legalization, just based on their political background. I could be wrong about that. Same with abortion. But they were In fact, they issued a ruling upholding an abortion law the same day, but they said, the people get to decide this if they want to.
Mhm.
And so I would feel good about bringing anything before the court. Now, I think you need a good team like we had here. I wasn't involved in drafting, but my colleague, Glenn Burhans, who's a Florida lawyer, and others were involved in drafting, and they were very smart about how they did it, both the amendments text and the summary, and they tried to make sure they followed the Florida Supreme Court's guidance in other cases. So you got to be smart in the way you do it, but I don't think this is a political court. I think it's very conservative jurisprudentially, but I think they're going to give anybody a fair shake. And so in some sense, it makes sense to do these incremental changes because of the single subject rule. So the one thing you really can't do is put a bunch of stuff into one amendment. So I think they'll be open to future amendments so long as they're well crafted. I did not get a hint of political bias at all or policy bias from this court. I thought they were very professional and
Awesome.
did a great job. I'd love to get to argue there again.
My guess is that you did go over the previous failures in going through the courts, like the regulate Florida and the make it legal Florida. I'm not going to call it MILF. That was ridiculous. Yeah, and yet I propagate that further. But the fact is, I was trying to find out, was it the text, was it the concept, or was it the court that allowed, that knocked down those other two ballots?
Oh, the other non-medical ones?
Yeah.
It's easy in hindsight to say you should have done this and that, obviously, but they had some pretty glaring issues. I mean, one of them just did not mention federal law. And so in the medical cases, the court had said this passes muster because it tells people in the summary that it's not going to legalize as a matter of federal law. And one of these just didn't say a word about it. So that was kind of an unforced error, I think. It'd be interesting to know what their thinking had been on that one. Because I know it's expensive to get these ballot initiatives on, so you think you'd pay lawyers to figure out all the issues beforehand. So I really think it probably was the text of the amendments there. I don't see either of those decisions as political or hackery or anything. I think they just were genuinely trying to apply the standards. And we looked at those cases and figured out the right way to do it, and they upheld it. So.
Wasn't the regulated Florida one? It was the single subject rule that knocked.
I guess the other one was single subject. I can't remember what the two subjects were there, but
yeah, it's kind of hard to have an 18-page rule and expect it to be all single subject. There's going to be some slip up there.
I'm pretty sure that a lot of the criticism towards Amendment 3. Sorry for the ringing in the background. But I'm pretty sure a lot of the criticisms for Amendment 3, you can point to these other initiatives and say it was struck down because of this. Like, we need to have this single subject rule. Like there's, I don't know, I'm not an attorney, but I'm going to use an attorney word here: precedents.
Well, the Florida Chamber of Commerce submitted a brief in our case saying it violated the single subject rule. Yeah. The Attorney General did not make that argument, I think, with good reason. But the Chamber of Commerce's view was you can't both legalize use and legalize sale. And we were like, well, I mean, how are people going to buy it? That doesn't really make sense. There's a phrase in the cases of two sides of the same coin. Something that's two sides of the same coin is one subject. And we said being able to purchase it lawfully and being able to use it are two sides of the same coin. I guess their point was, well, you could have legalized personal growing with use and that's it. And then that would have been the one subject. But the Florida Supreme Court, I think only one justice agreed to that argument.
And yet we've got states who actually have laws in place that say it's legal to possess and use, but not legal to buy or sell, which is similar to prohibition back in the 1920s. Is
that okay? So I thought only DC had that situation now.
It was DC, but it was also, I think, two other states that actually had that.
Virginia's in that same boat. Their governor just vetoed retail sales, but it is still legal to possess it and essentially have it.
Interesting.
And so Prince has this huge collection of stickers that he bought where he got the cannabis as a gift with the stickers so that he was able to purchase it from the various dispensaries around the DC area.
They're not dispensaries, Gary. Remember, the dispensaries are not, retail sales are not licensed because DC has that rider, and again, the federal government holding back DC from moving forward. But yeah.
John, I just have to ask you. I know, just to not get away from all the legal jargon, DeSantis commented on that this would just allow the whole state to smell like weed. Do you have any response to that?
Yeah, so that's the op-ed I wrote with Glenn Borehans. It was in the Tampa Bay Times. I think he's mistaken about that. It's a legitimate concern in that I wouldn't want every place to smell like weed either. But the law does not allow that. The law says the legislature has authority to enact regulations consistent with the amendment, and it would be perfectly consistent with the amendment to enact what lawyers call time, place, or manner restrictions. Meaning, if they don't want it smoked in public, if they don't want it smoked in certain areas, they can do that. Now, they couldn't say you can't smoke it anywhere. If you smoke it in your home, that's got to be allowed. But it'd be perfectly permissible under the text of the amendment for the legislature to say no public consumption. And so I think the governor is mistaken about that one. I share his concern in the sense that I wouldn't want that situation either, but I don't think the amendment allows that.
Now, John, can public consumption be something that can be criminalized, or is this something that should be a civil penalty, or is that really just up to the legislature's prerogative as to how hard they come down on it?
As I read it, it's up to the legislative prerogative, because what the amendment says is that you can't have criminal or civil penalties for personal use, but it doesn't specify where use is permitted. And as I said, the legislature couldn't just say, well, it's not permitted anywhere. But if they enact something reasonable that says, look, you can't do it in public streets, near playground, whatever they decide they want to do, as long as it's reasonable, I would think that the amendment allows that. And so just like the legislature has comprehensive regulations for public use of alcohol and tobacco, I don't think marijuana would be any different.
One of the states that has received a lot of criticism for their rollout of their adult use sales and their adult use possession laws has been the state of New York, because, they essentially made it to where you smoke it anywhere you can smoke a cigarette. And so that's one of the things that kind of DeSantis alludes to with this. He doesn't want things to smell like that. But Florida has clean air laws. We don't have restaurants you can smoke in anymore, like in the Carolinas or other places, So these are, the fact that you think you'd smell weed everywhere just isn't something that would happen. I mean, you can't even smoke a cigarette at the University of South Florida anymore. Like, there are clean air college campuses, all over the place now. So
I know that statute, by the way.
Thank you, Gary.
Medical marijuana has been legal now for almost a decade, over half a decade. And, I've only been in Florida a few times in the last couple of years, but I don't smell marijuana anywhere. Exactly. And they have the same authority to regulate in time, place, or manner as they have now. So they were under the amendment. So I don't think it's a problem. The difference with New York, of course, is you have a very progressive legislature there. Here, there's a very conservative legislature. So I'm pretty confident they're going to enact reasonable policies to make sure those fears do not materialize.
Well, they're already in place. Just the nature of the vertical integration. There's only 23 license holders. Maybe 19 or 20 actually are in operation with actual plants and doing sales. And then you look at dispensaries wise. There's 618 storefronts in Florida, but these are established, regulated places. Even if you go to them, you don't even smell bud. And some of them are in mini malls, strip malls. Some have their own standalone buildings. But those fears that essentially the politicians are cooking up right now who are against this, just as you said, they're just not found, because they've already well regulated and well established how cannabis gets done in the state of Florida. I mean, essentially, you can utilize it in the safety of your own home. If you're a renter, you're at the mercy of your landlord, and if you're in public housing, you're fresh out of luck.
Yeah. It is telling that this is a criticism, and the criticism is really not on the merits. There should not be legalization under Florida law, because that's probably not a winning political argument. So they're going to something else.
Yeah, those damn smelly potheads. Personally, I like the smell. I think it would improve the quality of life here in Florida.
Well, that's what's great about freedom. Everybody gets to decide what they want to do.
It literally smells like piss in Florida.
Well, that's better than the way it smells in New York or San Francisco sometimes, I tell you that much. Or Kansas.
All the Florida part of that. Every time I've been to Florida, it's smelled very nice.
Yes. I always wonder what would happen if they outlawed the smell of urine and beer in New Orleans.
The areas that I can afford to live at, John, I'm sorry, it smells bad.
Well, where Carlos is broadcasting from, John, is Ybor City, which is it's analogous to Bourbon Street in New Orleans,
Nice.
So that's why he made the joke about the smells there. So, we do have a workshop that we prepared for the folks. John, if you got to leave, we totally understand. Let's get another round of questions in. But if you want to stay, we're going to do a quick slideshow presentation for the voters on Amendment 3, take a deep dive into it, and really have folks understand what they're voting for. And so you're free to stick around if you want to raise some questions.
I'm done, but I'm happy to take some more questions if you have them.
Yeah, so let's do another round of questions. Carlos, let's go to you first, brother. I know you usually have the least amount to say, so let's let you hear what you got to say to John.
I'm good.
Gary, how about you, brother?
Okay, well, first off, I am curious to know what is going on with the cannabis legalization in Texas right now. I know you guys have a whole different structure when it comes to the legislature. You got 2 years on, 2 years off. Is that correct? In regards to funding in the legislature?
Yeah, they meet every 2 years for a period of months, and so that's not happening again for a little while. That just happened. I guess that happened last year. It's already 2024, so that happened last year. So next year.
But they've gotten shut down pretty much in the 11th hour over the last couple of sessions, correct?
Yeah, exactly. And there can be emergency sessions. I'm not an expert in the whole procedure, but there can be emergency extensions to get things done. Governor Abbott has been pushing for vouchers, and he's been extending things on that, but I'm really not privy to all that legislative politicking.
Okay.
I haven't heard of any serious effort to legalize in Texas. Maybe I'm just not privy to it, but it's very hard for me to believe there would be support for that in the legislature. And we must have some kind of ballot amendment procedure, but I don't think it's utilized that often.
Well, I guess that's one thing that Florida has in common with Texas, is that you've got the legislature, which is 0.001% of the population, who does not understand their own constituency. When you have an approval of medical cannabis in the 80% range, and for non-medical use in the 50s to 60s, and yet you have politicians who say, no way, no how, that is not being in touch with the people. That is not representative government, as far as I can see. But we have that situation.
Yeah, I mean, Democratic coalitions are interesting because sometimes there are issues that the majority feels one way, but the minority cares a lot more. And they influence policy because you have to get their votes for other things, or you have to bring them into the coalition, and they just care a lot more. And I don't know if that's what's gone on within the Republican Party on this issue, with the people who want to maintain prohibition maybe have cared more than others within the party who, as I said, see this as generational and are going to change in the future. I don't know. But we'll see. I
see our advocacy group out here as being highly bipartisan. We've got a lot of Republicans. We have a lot of Democrats who are all advocates, and they all have their own viewpoint and standpoint. The fact is, they all agree to one thing, and that is you don't get to 60% of the vote without being bipartisan. And so they know that this is a bipartisan issue all the way, and we expect it to stand that way. But one of the issues that a lot of people have brought up was in regards to the motives or agenda of, I don't know whether you can speak to this or not, of the sponsor of this bill, of the folks who put their money into Safe and Smart Florida. Was it basically just to work on their bottom line, or to do the greater good?
Well, I don't have a lot of window into the sponsor's motivations. It's obviously a business, but my experience with them and with the industry generally is that there are a lot of people who, even aside from their personal business interests, really care about the issue and changing the country on this issue, changing the state on this issue. So I think they had positive motives in trying to get this on the ballot and move the state, what in their view is forward on this issue. Obviously, it's a lot of money to spend, and you're not going to do that unless it's in your business interest to do so. But I do think they had genuine motives in wanting to get this on the ballot and reach what I think is a major step forward on this issue for the state.
How did they reach out to you?
I knew some of the people involved in I knew through others some of the people involved in the political committee, Smart and Safe Florida, and so it was the committee that reached out to me to represent them in the case. And I do appellate work. I'm known as a conservative legally and politically. I think they probably found that attractive for arguing in the Florida Supreme Court. And yeah, that was it. Said, would you be willing to do this case? And I said, yeah.
Because it gets to be sticky in regards to agendas, because there's always a profit motive, and we hear always about patients versus profits, and so often we found that the profits tend to win out, but it's profits also that pay for the lawyers, that pay for the courts, that allows you to move this thing forward. And so
I mean, that's a big process to get all those signatures, and it takes a lot of money in organization.
Yeah, you have to have a lot of people who are definitely ready and willing to knock on a lot of doors, walk around a lot of parking lots and things of that sort, and hopefully don't come back with a stack of petitions signed by Mickey Mouse and Superman.
I did it for Amendment 2 for a whole summer, Gary. Damn near got heat stroke doing it. So I remember what it was like to work those 16-hour days getting petitions, and then fighting with the paid petitioners at that, So those are definitely some interesting things. There's a lot of folks asking, about, John, in your opinion of True Leave and their lobbying efforts in Florida, but you were just a hired gun to get this through the Supreme Court. So I just wanted to essentially kind of characterize that, because some folks, they have a hard time disconnecting between the amendment and the people who are sponsoring the amendment. You know what I mean?
Yeah, no, I don't know a thing about anybody's lobbying efforts. I can't really speak to that, but I guess my advice to everyone would be, the amendment's going to be posted online, so not just the summary. You can actually go and read the amendment, and whether you like the motives of the people pushing it or not, you should just read it yourself and decide what you think and whether this should be the law. Sometimes laws are pushed by people you disagree with, and sometimes they're not. But their lobbying efforts on hemp or whatever it is are not going to have anything to do with what this law does.
Yeah, I own a hemp company out here, John, and I worked very hard to try to suppress the whole hemp bill thing, and I still am. I'm currently during the show, I'm texting hemp growers and sending them to the Healthy Hemp Association, which, by the way, if you're a hemp grower, you should totally reach out to me, and we need you at Healthy Alternatives. But as much as I hate what True Leave did and what True Leave lobbied for, I can't allow people to get arrested in this state. I just can't go against that. So what's in the past is in the past. Maybe we should start working towards the future here.
Well, John, you closed it out on a very good term, as far as how you just worded things. So we really appreciate you being here. If you got any parting words for the voters and for folks in this state, now would be the time.
Oh, sure. Yeah. I mean, it's just a really cool thing that the voters get to go into the voting booth and decide how they're going to amend the Constitution. And one of the things we said at the argument in the Florida Supreme Court was that we're confident that most voters treat this as a sacrosanct responsibility and treat it seriously, and we'll pay attention to the words. And I just hope everyone, if you can, pull it up online, look at the amendment, see if you agree with it. And if you do, which I think you should if you're on that side of the issue, vote for it in November.
Now, one of the things that I don't want to let you go before I finish talking about this. One of the things that Ashley Moody used in her briefs and her arguments was the fact that people don't realize that this particular amendment will enrich the MMTCs and therefore hold on to a possible oligarchy or cartel or whatever you wish to call it in regards to the cannabis industry is concerned. But that amendment fell flat, didn't it?
That argument fell flat. The reason is that the amendment's text allows the legislature to license other entities. So if there's a feeling that there is too much concentration of power or whatever the issue is, the legislature is going to have full authority to license other entities, not just MMTCs, to engage in the activity authorized by the amendment.
But they actually have to license them. It's not a matter of getting permission. You actually have to apply for and pay for a license.
Correct. And the legislature will likely have to enact a licensing scheme for those other entities.
So those are all rules that will be created based on the powers given to the I guess the Department of Regulated Business, who will be working on those particular rules and regulations, as opposed to the health department, who did the medical rules. And that's the way that is going to be. But I did find it kind of disingenuous, the fact that the folks who created these vertical outlets were the same ones who are saying, but I don't think that the public realizes the harm is going to be caused by these giant oligarchies that they themselves had created in the first place. So that.
Who said that? I guess I wasn't following that.
Ashley Moody.
Oh, I see. Got it. Okay, got it.
Yeah, I mean, it was the legislature that created this vertical only infrastructure that only it makes it basically you have to be a millionaire to get in, and then you become a bigger millionaire. And anybody else who wants to get into the business is really essentially not available to do it in the current structure as it is right now. And yet what they were worried about was, I hope that people realize that they're voting for the furtherance of that particular policy. And I don't see how they could possibly argue against it when they're the ones who created it in the first place.
Well, Gary, that's the nature of Florida politics. It's hypocritical to say the least. So, well, John, we thank you for taking the time out of your busy day to join us today and share with the voters of Florida just your thoughts on the amendment. I want to thank you for successfully defending it before the Supreme Court, because you've created, essentially a pathway for future amendments, definitely ones that are going to be more patient and people oriented in the future to go up before the court. Just based on the fact that we can see the state just doesn't have a good enough argument in many ways if you can word your amendment properly to shoot it down, which is what this one did. The people behind it did take the time to make sure they paid the right folks to word it properly. So for future grassroots things, it just goes to show how much money has a big play in getting the right talent to get something done. So,
and there was one other question. I am sorry, I'm not letting you go. But what can I say? But we have people saying, how is it possible that we even need this amendment because the 2018 Farm Act automatically made all cannabis legal? You and I know both that that's not exactly true, but did you want to speak to that?
Oh, I'm not even aware of what the Farm Act is, but I know that it did not make it legal, because there would have been no case here and there would be no issue right now if it made everything legal.
Exactly. Well, John, thank you again. We appreciate you joining us. Next here on the show, for those who are going to stick around, we're going to take a deep dive into Amendment 3, what it does, what it doesn't do, and the impacts here on our state in Florida. So, Carlos, if you want to cue up the slideshow for folks, and we can take a look.
Thank you so much, John.
Thank you all.
Thank you, John.
Thanks, John.
Stay safe. Have a chili pie on me.
All right, make that a full. All right, that'll work. Cool. So we can still see us. All right, so just Amendment 3 is going to be on the ballot this year. Actually, Carlos, go back the other way. That'll make it easy. That way, folks can see the whole thing. So click to the next slide. All right, first I want to start out with where we are with marijuana arrests, and this is a U.S. annual marijuana arrest. You can see with prohibition in the 70s, and then you see the war on drugs escalate in the 90s with mandatory minimums, 3-strike laws, and then you see how much things have dropped with legalization and post-legalization. So moving forward, click the next slide. Let's talk about Florida. Florida is ground zero for the war on drugs. Historically, Florida law enforcement agencies don't even report their marijuana arrest data to the FBI. And for years, there was no data available for Florida. And even when you did, it was incomplete. They're only showing a few thousand or a few hundred marijuana-related arrests. But if you're Floridian, and the ACLU actually did a study pre-legalization with data going back to 2010 that showed there are over 57,000 marijuana arrests in the state of Florida. Now, what does Amendment 3 do? Amendment 3 will end tens of thousands of marijuana-related arrests, many of which are felonies. Now, if you look at Florida, has some of the strictest felony laws in the state. 20 grams or more will get you a felony in this state. And a felony is punishable by up to 5 years and a $5,000 fine. I can tell you that felony charges are very difficult once you're hit with them. I mean, if you have any type of other record and you get hit with a felony, there's you're going to be locked into a very nasty system. You might get lucky, like some people who get felony charges who don't have a previous record, who they might send you to drug diversion court. But understanding that any amount of concentrate in the state of Florida is also a felony. Amendment 3 will essentially change the laws to where there is no crime and no civil penalties for 3 ounces of flour and up to 5 grams of concentrate. Understand that right now, 20 grams, which isn't even a whole ounce, is a felony. And understand that any amount of concentrate is a felony. Now, in regards to sales and paraphernalia, those are other statutes that are going to be addressed, but personal possession is what is addressed by the amendment. The legislature will have to address other things around paraphernalia and other issues around sales.
Now, Ann Thorpe, I'm trying to pronounce that correctly, was asking if it's already illegal. If it wasn't already illegal, then why would True Leave try to make it a felony? Well, let's be clear, and this has nothing to do with whether or not we're for or against it. They're not making it a felony. It's currently a felony, but they're actually changing the levels. Right now, if you have 22 grams, including the bag, of cannabis on you, you'll be charged with a felony. This will raise that level to 3 ounces.
Mm-hmm.
If you are charged with any kind of concentrate, and that means a vape pen, my friend.
Yep.
You will be charged with a felony because it's any level of concentrate whatsoever. Even though we're talking about oil, we're not just talking about wax and dabs and things of that sort.
Yep. And here's the thing too. There's some people in the comments saying things around like, "Oh, well, THCA is not a felony. Just tell them that it's hemp." The fact is that those things will, if a cop really wants to make it his day, he'll arrest you, and you got to fight it in court. But you're also going to have to hire your own experts out of your own pocket that are certified by the Florida Department of Law Enforcement to independently test it. Also understand that if you have flour, depending on how it's handled and depending on where it's stored, the THCA can convert the THC under the correct conditions, and your hemp flour can now be hot. And so by the time you go to trial, right, you can have hot evidence, and you're going to get bad test results. So again, the excuse of, oh, well, just tell them it's hemp, that's not always going to work in certain cases, in certain law enforcement situations. What Amendment 3 is doing is essentially for 3 ounces or less, and in 5 grams of concentrate or less, those are no longer going to be civil or criminal penalties. Now, let's go back to the comparison of where Florida is with other states. The blue states on the map here, those are adult use states. Those are states where, what Florida is essentially going to become should the Amendment 3 pass. And then you can see the states that have medical use. Certain states have certain decriminalization on the books, but there is a big swath in this in the South of states that don't have anything available to their people. And politically, they also don't have ballot measures like we have. So Floridians are very lucky to have any type of direct democracy. They don't have that in the Carolinas. You can see Texas is another major standout. Also, there's Nebraska, Kansas, Wyoming, Idaho. Those are other major states. Iowa. Even Wisconsin, Indiana is definitely another ground zero state for prohibition. And I mean, I know the folks there with Indianapolis Normal, they've been at it over 50 years and it's still fighting. So let's move on, as folks can see where the snapshot is in this country right now. The disparities in arrest rates really are stark, especially in the South. People like to think Florida is this beautiful metropolitan paradise, but Florida is still part of the Jim Crow South. And the disparities between African Americans and Latinos, being arrested. The other thing that we have to address is this is only the first step in addressing prohibition. We still are going to have to fight with the legislature to do things like they've done in Maryland or Virginia and end the smell of marijuana as probable cause for a search. Because even if you're legally in possession of it, if it smells like weed in your car, they can toss your car. And, we've seen, misconduct among law enforcement in Florida on video and on TV. We've seen it on social media. So there are concerns about, the fact is that we want to limit police interactions with cannabis users, as much as possible. Because again, that anytime you're in a police interaction, that does open up the door for other issues to be involved. And again, if we can end probable cause of a search, with the smell of cannabis, that would be another thing that we need to address moving forward. But these disparities are clear. They're in black and white. Carlos, let's move on to the next slide. Again, the research is there. People are still being treated differently, even in legal states, with racial disparities. But again, what we do see is that when you do adopt adult use, there is large decreases in arrest. And that is a big step forward when it comes to cannabis. So let's move on to the next slide. I talk about cannabis a lot with folks, because this has been part of human culture. It's only been the last 100 years, and really here in America, that things have been criminalized so hard. But whether it was ancient China, ancient India, the Middle East, Africa, or Europe, cannabis has been used for medicine. It's been used in religion. It's been used for paper. It's been used in warfare. So let's just keep it moving and know that human civilization has utilized this a long time. Next slide. All right. Where does cannabis come from here in the Americas? Cannabis started with colonialism. It's a plant that's not native to this part of the hemisphere, but because of colonialism, it ended up getting spread everywhere, even to the point where it became mandatory for colonists to grow it in order they could support the large navies of the colonial era coming out of Europe with hemp products that were used on ships, whether it's sails, ropes, pitch, tar, etc. So let's move on past cannabis and colonialism and understand it's America's oldest crop. There it is on the back of the $10 bill. Thomas Jefferson had to sell 2,000 pounds of weed in order to buy guns for the colonial army when he was governor of Virginia, because they wouldn't accept the newly minted American government's money. Understand that it even had to play a role in how different systems of slavery were enacted in this country. And in Tennessee and the Kentuckys, the fact that they had a quota system allowed certain slaves to make slave wages for cultivating cannabis. And eventually some bought their freedom and even opened up their own plantations in regards to cannabis. Again, that being said, before, it's something that has been ingrained in American society. So why did it become illegal? Well, let's go to the next slide. Surprise, racism and economics. That's why. This man in particular, Harry Anslinger, who was the first head of the Federal Bureau of Narcotics, was someone who tried to essentially validate what was going on with his agency. So he made a big scare around immigration and these evil Mexican plants known as marijuana that was coming in. Even the Jim Crow era posters there. Carlos has one in the shop. He's showing on the camera, or the one there. I mean, you see a black man with a white woman, and he's injecting marijuanas. I'm sorry. When did we start mainlining weed? Ever, right? This is just the scariness of it. But understand that companies like DuPont had economic, interest in making sure that hemp products were made illegal because they had artificial oils, artificial paints, which directly connected to hemp. And that Harry Anslinger was appointed essentially by his wife's uncle, who was, Mellon, who was the U.S. Secretary of Treasury at the time. The Federal Bureau of Narcotics wasn't like the DEA, where it's an independent agency. It was housed in the Treasury Department. This has always been about taxes. Marijuana and illegal marijuana grows have always been about taxes, and it still is to this day. So as we move forward on the slides, in 1969, the Marijuana Tax Act got struck down, and that's when the Nixon administration came back with the Controlled Substances Act. And the Nixon administration knew what they were doing. They knew that they could make it illegal to be black or be a hippie and be against the war, but they didn't wage a public opinion campaign with the war on drugs. They knew if they could associate hippies with weed and the African-American community with heroin, that they would have an opportunity there to win votes in the Deep South. And in the Southern strategy, it worked. But the hypocrisy of the federal government is that since the Clinton administration, essentially, the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services has been utilizing and researching and has had a patent since the Bush administration on utilizing cannabinoids to help with dementia, Alzheimer's, strokes. And that was the reason why I started using it for my father. who had suffered from strokes and was suffering from a terminal form of dementia, and then wind up catching me felony charges. And so, because they said I had 25 grams on me, even though I know I didn't. Again, police interactions, 17 grams turns into 25 with the right cops pushing for the right motives. Let's move on to the
bag.
In just the racism in general coming from the Nixon administration and those of that era, it was talked about earlier on the show today with John. And then you took at the 80s and 90s with the propaganda of just say no, and even the fact that the escalation of the war on drugs. And we looked at the charts earlier. I want to go to the next slide so folks can see the charts. The federal prisoner population. You can see how these sentencing reform acts, the 3 strike laws, the war on drugs, all these things have just skyrocketed to where the private prisons now have a major say-so in this country, and they're a major lobby. Let's move on. The private prisons are made up of 2 of the largest groups. There's Geo Group and Core Civic, both which have a lot of lobbying. Both also run the immigration detention centers, but they're not the only ones benefiting from this system of private prisons and private immigration detention centers. Much of our own 401ks and retirement plans have hedge fund investors and investment groups that are interconnected with many of these companies. And all these companies are benefiting from prohibition. And you can see that just in the same way with private prisons, private immigration detention centers are also skyrocketing. So let's move on to the next slide. It's a vicious cycle. The politicians are pressured by lobbying groups to pass punitive laws. They make for more sentences. They build more prisons. I mean, they're building a 40-story prison skyscraper in New York. They just going to build $1 billion prison in downtown Baltimore. These are things that are happening in even liberal states, folks. So understand that when it comes to the prison industry, they have money to buy both sides of the aisle. Vanguard, BlackRock. These are some of the leading investors in other medical marijuana treatment centers, like Cookies, for example. Some of his lead investors are BlackRock and Vanguard. And all in all, when we look at legalization and what this means for this country, Harvard Department of Economics has said legalization can generate billions of dollars of tax revenue if it's taxed like alcohol and tobacco. What that also means is that taxing is going to drive folks back to the legacy market. And then again, when we look at disparities in arrest and where we're at with these things, again, Florida not reporting, right? You can see that on there, but you can see very high areas of in disparities in arrest when it comes to Black and white individuals in the different states. And think about what's working against you. You get arrested. You got to go to the court system. You're going to get fleeced for money. And then you're going to either end up with a criminal record, or you're going to have to pay out to the rehab industrial complex. And I say that because you have these nonprofits that get tons of money for rehab services, and they become the arbiters of your freedom. If you pee abnormal for a drug test because you drank too much water one day, or you didn't drink enough water, your whole freedom can be at risk just based on what this nonprofit drug rehab facility says. So there are definitely a lot of tools working against the average person. Now let's look at the Florida cannabis industry. These are the folks right here who will be licensed immediately, essentially, who are already licensed to start selling adult use. Now, what does that mean? Well, it means that consumers, should you pass Amendment 3, would have accessible access to adult use cannabis without physician recommendations sometime between the spring and summer of 2025. I say spring and summer because the Florida legislature, when it came to implementing Amendment 2, took the whole legislative session and didn't get it done. They had to have a special session in May to actually address it and get it done. So it wasn't until July 1st that we saw medical marijuana in the state of Florida. It could be around that same time, whether it's the end of May or it's July 1st, though that's around the time in 2025. Now, people talk about Trulieve. Understand that Trulieve has put a lot of money, millions of dollars behind Amendment 3. Trulieve also only operates 131 out of the 618 storefronts that currently exist. Passage of Amendment 3 is going to permit these other, 500 some folks to also have established facilities serving the adult use market. All right. Some folks don't like any of the dispensaries. Some folks like some of them. Some folks, prefer their dealers. Again, that's on you. But moving forward, This is the fact of the matter, and this is why we exist as an organization. We are going to be here to course correct and put the consumer first. NORML has always been a consumer advocacy organization. Our job is to make sure that marijuana consumers' civil rights are protected and folks are not arrested for utilizing this substance. This has been the core of what NORML has been since its founding. When it comes to Smart and Safe Florida, it's up for you, the people, to decide. Understand, again, that we covered what it will do. It will decriminalize 3 ounces of flour and allow for 5 grams of concentrate. Both are currently felonies. It will eliminate that altogether. But what's missing is these necessary parts of it. This is the part that the Florida legislature is missing. This is the part where all you naysayers need to get involved. It's not enough to bitch about Amendment 3 not being fair. It is the fact that we need help as the people to get this done properly. We need medical and personal home grow. We need worker protections. You know, whether it's legal or not, people are still getting fired from their jobs. If you're lucky enough to have a job that doesn't drug test you, good for you. But for some people, that's not an option. And then medical discrimination and protections. People are denied organ transplants every day. They're kicked off their pain management plans because they choose to use cannabis instead of opioids. Your parents, very good people, have their kids taken away from them or are investigated because they're utilizing cannabis. Pregnant women who have intractable, morning sickness, who just can't get through it, can have their babies taken away from them for testing positive for THC. And then, should we pass Amendment 3 as a state? That is the first step. And that is a vital step to granting clemency and releasing cannabis prisoners. Let me be clear about this. If we don't adopt Amendment 3, people are still going to be arrested on felony charges. And people are still going to be saddled with records. And a disparate number of those are going to be Black and Latino peoples. And if you have enough privilege to not be affected by it and say, you know what, it doesn't have home grow, I'm not going to vote for it, then, hey, I'm glad you have that privilege and those rights, and you can do that. But the vast majority of folks don't have it. And we're never going to be able to release the cannabis prisoners unless we take the first step and end prohibition. We're never going to be able to expunge charges unless we take the first step and end prohibition. This is your opportunity as voters to take the first step. Now, again, let's just put this in perspective. And Martin Luther King, back in the 60s, said, you know what? Fuck the Civil Rights Act of 1964. It doesn't protect our voting rights. We wouldn't be anywhere. But you know what they did do? They got the Civil Rights Act of 64, and then they came back and got the Voting Rights Act of 65. And this is what we have to do as voters, as cannabis advocates, is we have to take the first step to end prohibition. And then we can work on freeing people, cleaning up records. And then we have all these other things to do, like protecting your rights as a parent, protecting your rights as a worker, protecting your rights in the medical field. And the only way we're going to do that is with you, with your support, which is why I ask folks, become a member of Suncoast NORML. Become a NORML member in your state if you're watching from out of state. If you don't have a NORML chapter near you and you want to be a member of us, great, come get involved with us. If not, get 10 friends together and start your own NORML chapter in your part of the Sunshine State. I would love for us to have more chapters in the state. I would love for us to have more advocates that we can work with. But let's be clear what these facts are. 88% of Americans oppose criminalizing marijuana. Rescheduling cannabis is not enough. It has to be descheduled. And the president has already started issuing out pardons for folks. But pardons are only the first step in reforming federal cannabis policy. We have to end workplace discrimination against responsible cannabis users. And we're seeing what public pressure is doing, where they're actually advancing cannabis banking bills in the U.S. Senate, where we have the vice president of the United States in this country's entire 200 and close to 50-year history. We've never had a vice president say we need to legalize marijuana. And yes, she's even admitted to her own faults with the war on drugs. The fact that a politician would even come to the table and say mea culpa is a good first step. The fact is this: Florida will have legalization on the ballot in November. We also have Trump and Biden. And I can tell you, as a Democrat, A lot of Democrats are not happy with the choice that we have. A lot of Republicans are not happy with the choice that we have. A lot of independent voters are like, why the fuck should I even vote? Look, you have Trump, you have Biden, you have Amendment 3. These are the realities of the ballot in Florida. So let's take a deeper dive into what Amendment 3 is. It very clearly states here in there that medical marijuana treatment centers and other licensed entities, okay? So again, when the legislature goes to implement this in the 2025 legislative session, for all of you who want to get into the industry, for all of you who want things like home grow, you want expungements, whatever your wish list is that is preventing you from really taking this seriously, this is your opportunity. It's not going to be at the ballot. The ballot is just the first step, and Amendment 3 is the first step in ending prohibition. It's the implementation of it that is really going to shape what the adult use market looks like. So people who have been, essentially attacked by the industry with the hemp industry bill that came through this session, all of you should band together and lobby the legislature, like as Carlos said, when the implementation comes about. But very clearly, the personal use aspect of all of this is what ends prohibition. It says people will not be arrested and not be charged and not thrown in cages and not saddled with felony charges for concentrates up to 5 grams and for flour up to 3 ounces. Again, medical marijuana treatment centers that are currently licensed are going to get the first crack at this, but you have the ability now as the people to get organized and to press the Florida legislature for all the wish list of items that the system is currently falling short on. And that is our window. That is the path forward. That is the path for victory for cannabis consumers and for the small mom and pop businesses moving forward. And it's not striking down Amendment 3. Striking down Amendment 3 doesn't benefit anybody. Moving forward and ending prohibition, on the other hand, that's something that first step needs to be taken.
And let's be clear here. I mean, we've got probably the most interesting chat that we've had on this show today. I got the I got the picture of Martin Luther King smacking Krim Rivers in the face by reading the chat, and it's probably the funniest thing I've ever thought of.
Please make that a meme. I love that meme. Yes, and we should have that as a meme when it comes to implementation.
I just want to be. I want to make this clear, right?
Change the screen up, Carlos. Let's go back to talking. Yeah,
let's go back to talking. I just want to be clear. Like, this does not legalize only cannabis in true containers. It legalizes all cannabis, right?
So it legalizes up to 3 ounces. It does. Yeah, it's not just Truly, right? Mike, the question that and John brought it up. This is on the legislature. Is it 3 ounces? And is it because the amendment doesn't specify? It's on the legislature as far as enforcement goes. And this is what I said about things like probable cause for smell. Because if the legislature decides it has to be in the original dispensary containers for you not to go to jail, then that's a concern that folks are going to have. And that's a concern that people still have. I still educate people to this day. When you get cannabis, right, treat it as an open container. Put it in your trunk. Make sure it's not easily accessible. So, Carlos, what are your thoughts, brother?
Well, I mean, sometimes you got to do what you don't want to do. If you know what I mean, like sometimes you just gotta shut the fuck up and do what's right for other people. As much as I want to sell THCA, as much as I want to sell hemp, I want to legalize cannabis. I want to end people getting arrested for cannabis. That's my number one goal. And yeah, you could say it's THCA, you could say it's hemp. People are still getting arrested for it, though. People still have issues because of marijuana prohibition in the state of Florida, in the United States. I get it. We all think Trump is a savior, and we all think Trump legalized marijuana, but it's not true. It's not true. I still fucking, my card's expired right now, not that I do anything illegal, but if I did, I'd definitely I'd be looking over my shoulder. Like I am scared shitless to be out there with cannabis. And this would solve that.
Yeah, it's a lot of anxiety to take away from folks.
Yes, True Leave lobbied to take me out of the business. True Leave lobby, I fought that tooth and nails. I'm still fucking fighting it. We're going to continue to fight it. I have a feeling Gary may come up with, Gary and Cano here will come up with some sort of bill for the legislator to adopt hemp businesses into the business. I don't know what's going to end up happening, but we're going to continue to fight to keep this business open. I don't like that True Leave is going to make a lot of money off of it. I don't like that, companies that Vanguard and, that invest in private prisons are invested into companies that are going to profit off of this amendment. I don't like it. But it's a step in the right direction, and we're going to make sure that people don't get arrested for this in the state. And then once we get the opportunity to, we're going to keep fighting to open up the business. We're going to keep on fighting to keep things legal. And we're going to keep on fighting to make sure that we have freedoms here. And I get it. I don't fucking trust them. I don't want to help them. But I guess we're going to have to make a deal with the devil to make sure that, we're free here in Florida.
No, we're not telling you how to vote here.
Yeah.
We are not telling you how to vote. We don't have the right to tell you how to vote. That's the American way. But the fact is, you need to be educated enough to make an educated decision. So we're giving you both sides of the coin. You can't come to us and say, "Oh, you just want to make all the mom and pops felons." Well, right now, if you're selling THC or other products that are excluded from that hemp back thing, although that's kind of illegal, maybe illegal coming up soon, you are doing something illegal because right now it already is a felony. It already is a crime at this point in time. And we are trying to do what is called risk reduction. We're trying to reduce your risk of being arrested for utilizing the plant in the way you want to. Now, I am not in favor of a lot of things in regards to this, and you can probably hear it in the questions I was asking today. That are they going to open it up only to people who can set up a vertically integrated company? Because that is damn hard and damn expensive. And the average mom and pop will not be able to do that. When you think of mom and pop, you think of a retail store. You think of one store that has, umpteen brands in there hanging from the walls, like they have in Maryland, like they have in Michigan, like they have in so many other places. And Carlos has a red tab he wants to tell you about.
This is legal marijuana in Florida right now. This is what you guys are saying is legal, right? I was selling it. But the Florida Department of Agriculture came in, put this fucking red tag on my shit, and put a stop sale on it. This is not freedom.
No.
Granted, I'm not going to be able to sell marijuana, but we're not allowed to do what we think we're allowed to do here. There's a lot of misinformed people out there. This is freedom in Florida. They're out there taking the THCA hemp off the shelf right now. It's not the law. It's not SB 1613 that did this. It's the Nikki Fried administration using the total THC law. This is statute here in Florida.
Mm-hmm.
I want to sell this stuff. I want to sell this stuff really bad. I want people to have it, be in possession of it, but we're not allowed. And unfortunately, this is the bullshit that we're going to have to put up with if we don't vote this law in.
Yep. This is the first step, again, team, for everybody listening. This is the first step towards ending prohibition. And again, all this will do is allow adult use sales without a doctor's recommendation. All right. And then even then, there's so much more with implementation that has to be done. We have the opportunity now to, again, influence elections because elections matter. Let me tell you something about the federal fight since I'm on the national board of normal. We will never get to 60 votes to end debate on any legalization bill at the federal level, whether it's rescheduling, descheduling, regular schmeggling, whatever you want to talk about, with the current state of the senators that we have. And one of those senators who is a hardline prohibitionist and former governor of Florida, Rick Scott, is on the ballot this year. You have the opportunity to get rid of a prohibitionist and to strike down prohibition in the state of Florida this year on the ballot. Regardless of how you feel about Trump or Biden, that's some serious shit as a cannabis user. You can take out the guy who, as governor, didn't want to see this happen, and it happened anyways. And you can take out the guy who, his whole time in the U.S. Senate, has been one of those votes to hold it up, one of those votes to prevent veterans from getting access to it. And being a Navy veteran himself, I can't think of a worse sin in all of this. So again, this is the opportunity here, this election cycle. You may not get another opportunity anytime soon, because when it comes to putting money for a ballot initiative, I would love for Normal to be able to do that. Both at the national level and at the state level, those millions and millions of dollars just aren't there. Even with our network of tens of thousands of members across the country, it's not there. No one is coming to save us. This is an opportunity here to take the first step towards it. And then we have to, again, fight at the legislative level. There are legislators at the local level, state house, state senate, that you can vote out this election. We got Tom Keene to flip a district, one of our own members in Osceola, in the Orlando area, to flip a seat. This is what we have to do, is to continually press and press. All those folks who voted to make hemp illegal, most of them are up for election or re-election this year, especially the ones in the House. You have a chance to change policy and reverse course. We have that chance to strike down prohibition. And as I said before, we cannot lose sight of what the path is to victory and to freedom. This is just the first step. It's not the end all be all. But again, we're never going to get to X, Y, and Z if we don't start at A.
Yeah. And we have to remember that neither party has a monopoly on the truth or on advocacy towards one side or the other. There are Republicans who are in favor of this. Some of them are afraid to speak out because of the top-down structure of the House as it stands right now. But the fact is, the more you put those people into office who are willing to listen and are willing to think moderately, the better chance we have of moving these things forward. Now, we know here at Suncoast Normal, regardless of how this election turns out in November, regardless of who comes into Senate, regardless of who comes into the governorship, we are going to have some work on our hands, and especially regardless of how this particular amendment goes. If it goes down, then we got to continue working from scratch to try to stop all those people from being arrested, stopping all those people from losing their jobs, all the other things that this bill actually does. And if it goes up, then we have a responsibility to do what we can in the legislature and other means to go ahead and get this implemented properly. We know the legislature has the ability to take a good bill that passes, like giving felons their vote back, and totally screw up the implementation to make it exactly the opposite of what it was intended to do in the first place.
And can't we, I'm just spitballing here, guys, but can't we, support the amendment and, also support a boycott of True Leave? Isn't that a possibility?
There's nothing. Yeah,
we're not
there's nothing
stopping
stopping
people to stop at True Leave. We're not telling people that there's only one place to get your cannabis from. If anything, you showed people that there's other options in your presentation. We could possibly legalize marijuana, and they're a company. We can fuck with their profits.
There are 487 other stores other than True Leaf stores in the state of Florida. True Leaf only makes up 131 stores out of 618. If you don't like their shitty products, if you don't like their popcorn nugs, if you don't like mold and pest and microplastics and being overcharged $70 for an eighth, then there are plenty of other opportunities. But understand is that here we are at this moment in time. This ballot initiative is here. You're going to vote on it either way. Okay. It's either a yes or a no, or maybe you just skip that bubble. But again, let's be clear of what a yes vote is. A yes vote is saying, yes, we want to end people being thrown in cages on felony charges. All right. Because right now, 20 grams is a felony. Any amount of concentrate is a felony in the state of Florida. And 3 ounces and 5 grams of concentrate is a hell of a lot better than no concentrate and 20 grams. And even then, less than 20 grams is still a misdemeanor charge. You're still getting saddled with a criminal record. So taking the first step in any prohibition, that's what a yes vote is going to do. It's also going to allow the existing licensed entities to start selling over the counter by pretty much the summer of 2025. Other entities that want to get into the business, we're going to have to work to lobby. We're going to have to work on the implementation. We're going to have to put pressure on the legislature. Hell, even once we get this done, we got to put pressure on them to stop drug testing in the state of Florida via urinalysis as a method of impairment. Because the fact is that urinalysis can detect metabolites in your pee from months ago. You could have not smoked for 3-4 months and still get fired from a job. That's messed up. There's so many things about the current state of Florida that we have to address. This is just the first step. And again, the amendment is very narrow. It doesn't address home grow. It doesn't address these things. But home grow will not exist without ending prohibition first. In what world do you think that we get home grow before we change possession limits and felonies? In what world do we get worker protections without first striking down prohibition? In what world do we release people from cages without first taking prohibition out? We got to take down prohibition first before anybody gets released from a cage. And you know what? The sad part about it is that, yes, there's going to be a handful of companies that make some money along the way on it. But again, those are the same companies that we have to call on to put dollars into these campaigns to release people from prison. Because we can definitely boycott the shit out of TrueLeave or any other company that doesn't want to donate to letting people out of cages. If they're going to make millions of dollars, then we want to see money earmarked in their profits going to some of these philanthropic things. And if not, we'll hold them accountable. But again, if you have such privilege in your life that you can vote no on Amendment 3 as a pothead, then more power to you. Move around. Do what you want to do. You got the freedom to move anywhere around this country. As a matter of fact, if you got that much freedom, I want you to go to Texas and spark up a J right on their state house steps and show me that cannabis is legal in all 50 states. Because I guarantee you it's not. And this is our opportunity in Florida to do some good.
Or Indiana.
Gary.
Or Kansas. Or Idaho. Or any of these states that are still falling by the wayside. That is the fact. And I need to stress this again because we're getting a lot of comments in regards to about home grow again. There is, and that is one of the things we discussed with John Bash today, that single amendment situation, that oneness of purpose that they talk about that makes it legal to put this ballot initiative on. If they had attached home grow onto this, that also allows for non-medical use, it would have gone down in the Supreme Court as not being a single subject issue. And we would not even have this to vote on. So that
my point on that is there was actually a petition initiative to legalize home grow that received no support.
None.
So what the fuck? Now you want to support it?
Yeah, where were all of y'all home grow advocates when Wise Florida was trying to collect petitions, when Mariah was putting up tens of thousands of dollars of her own money to make it happen? And again, look, as much as Kim Rivers is not the ideal business person of the year, she's not Dr. Evil, okay? The system that we have in this state is corrupt. And that when you have money, when you have profit, you can lobby to do these sort of things. What we're saying is that this is our time as the advocacy sector to come together and put dollars, talent, and time into these efforts. If we strike down prohibition, there is a narrow window of opportunity here for us on the implementation side of it to actually get mom and pop businesses to get home grow, whether that's growing at home or being able to grow at a state regulated facility. There's definitely some opportunities there. Understand that we're still, the free state of Florida is still Jim Crow Florida in a lot of ways. And so it is going to be a conservative slog to the path to freedom, through all of this. You got to get through the muck I mean, Florida is a swamp, and there's no bigger swamp than the Sunshine State. And it's a long walk to freedom through it all. But again, we're here to guide you through the process. Normal has been here on the front lines in the trenches for 50 years. Our chapter has been here for the better part of a decade, fighting, for medical patients' rights. And here we are, 10 years later, finally getting the opportunity to, strike down prohibition in the Sunshine State. Regardless of how you feel about the long game, this is right now the very first step. This is the first step in stopping these felony arrests and stopping the disparities that are affecting our criminal justice system in this state, and stopping people from having to go to rehab for weed. Because in the words of Bob Saget, marijuana is not a drug, okay? You never sucked a dick for marijuana, okay? These are we make jokes, but the fact of it is there are people with real drug problems who need support in our rehabs. And if you got people having to take up spaces in those rehabs because they need weed charges expunged, that's just absurd. Let's get the sick people the help that they need. Let's take some of this tax money that these politicians are planning for, adult use, and put it towards, helping people with opiate addictions. Let's reverse that stupid ass law DeSantis signed a couple years back that says you can't use cannabis in rehab facilities. There's so many things that we can focus on in this state, but instead we're here having a bitch fit with each other as advocates of whether or not Amendment 3 is going to do anything good. Yes, it's going to do something good. Yes, it's also going to have some consequences that on the business side of things don't benefit everybody. But that is the nature of American politics. You think everybody benefited from the Affordable Care Act? The insurance companies damn sure did, because they get to sell health insurance to poor people now. But you know what? There's a lot of poor people out there who now have health insurance and can get life-saving care that they didn't have otherwise. And that's what we're looking at here with this amendment. There's a lot of people that are not going to go to jail in 2025 and beyond, that for the last 100 years of Florida have gone to jail for cannabis. So you, the voters, have it on your plate. But I tell you this much, as an organization, Normal, we're going to say it's time to end prohibition. And it's time to get out there and pass this. And there's a lot of other things that we have to do alongside of it. And we're asking you, especially those folks who say they want to vote no, we need you to come on board and help us with our advocacy work. We need you to come on board and help us with influencing the politicians to do right by the people. So let's just stop, bitching at each other across the keyboards, and let's actually get some work done.
And I should mention, True Leave did support the amendment to try to keep the hemp industry away from being able to sell what they have to sell. It was anti-competition, and it was anti-free market, and it was the wrong thing to do. They're going to hurt a lot of people along the way because they wanted less competition. You can't game the system and get away with it when there are people involved.
It looks like Kano's computer fell apart there, or blew up or something.
Yeah, it runs on dabs. I think it just wore off.
So what do you say, Gary? We've already gone 1 hour, 37 minutes. I think it's time to end the show.
I would just put up a commercial for the membership and remind folks that we do have a special event this weekend.
Well, let's talk about that. Can you roll a blunt, Air Bear?
Yes, I can roll a blunt. I use the dollar bill method. You take the bill, you roll it up, and you hand the guy and say, "Give me a pre-roll."
Well, you have the opportunity. I don't think we're going to allow for dollar bills, but you have the opportunity to prove that you roll the best blunt in the Bay. This coming, what is it, Saturday, April 13th. I'm so bad at all this. On April 13th from 7 to 11 p.m., we are partnering with Chillum Mushroom and Hemp Dispensary and the Brothers Broadleaf to bring you Best Blunt of the Bay rolling competition. There's going to be a couple of different rounds to the event, right? You can competitors will test their skill utilizing the classics, wraps, papers, and tobacco leaf. And then the finale will be a freestyle. We've seen some cross joints before. We've seen some braided joints before. What are we going to see this year? Maybe a TIE fighter joint. I don't know. But come to the event. We're partnering with the brothers Broadleaf in order to bring you this event. Their fourth generation cigar legacy. They're going to be judging the event, and these guys, their cigar legacy. They own a blunt company, and they literally, like, their blunt company seeks out to make the perfect leaf for rolling blunts. So these guys are everything you need to be able to prove that you're the best blunt in the Bay.
And there are some lady rollers out there that are really damn good on the freestyle. So I'm putting out a challenge to you. So if any of you have a ex-boyfriend or whatever, or who you want to get down on, feel free to use the freestyle to create a little voodoo doll with an erection, and we'll let you smoke it.
So this yeah, we'll smoke.
Thus inflicting harm on the person who
I am smoking no Santeria joints, but this QR code right here that I'm pointing at right now on if you scan that QR code, it's going to take you to the best blunt of the Bay section of our website. But even more importantly, if you scan this QR code that I just switched up, this will take you to become a member of Suncoast Normal. And why the hell would you want to become a member of Suncoast Normal, Gary?
Well, for one thing, you become part of the fight. We do the best we can to do it with as little as possible. I have gone to Tallahassee, slept in the car, and ate off the buffets. But the fact is, we still need to present ourselves to the legislature and get all our ducks in a row and get the word out to make certain that we get more people together to implement all these things we need to implement. And we need your help. We need your time. We need your treasure. And we need your talent. So let's start out with the treasure and go ahead and go online to suncoastnormal.org/membership and go ahead and order your membership kit, which you can pick up at Chillum or he can send it to you. And let's get involved.
And that's a good way to get involved. Plus, I believe if you're a member, you get to come to a bunch of our events, just the one I just talked about. And you get to ask Gary for advice.
Yes, which I will freely give for a price.
And, whatever happens, I just want to say that, it's a pretty uncertain time for the cannabis movement in Florida. There's a lot of people that are pissed right now, and I think they have the right to be. I don't want to make this about swaying people one way or another, but whatever you're doing, I'm sure everybody is coming from a place of compassion and coming from a place of love. And we will get by if we just put our bullshit aside and care for each other. So please make the right decision. I don't know. I don't know what that decision is yet, but it looks like we're going to vote yes on 3.
And remember, you have your choice of the medical market. And if this goes through, you may have the non-medical market and, of course, the non-legal market, whatever you want to call it. And there's pros and cons on all those things. In regards to the guys on the corner, the trappers and that sort, you really don't know what you're buying. You can't just ask them for a COA and get all the listings of all the things that are there and not there. They don't go through the scrutiny that other folks do. Now, they grant you some of them self-scrutinize, and that's cool. But do you really know which one is which? So be careful out there. Don't take chances. And always go for the health and not for the jail.
Yeah, and don't fall for the bullshit. Trump did not legalize marijuana. That is just not true. There is a reason why people are getting arrested for it, and there is a reason why, these. What was there? There was a pop-up recently in Tampa that got raided, and everybody was saying it was hemp flower, but they still got arrested. They're still paying the price, and they still dragged their mugshots across the fucking news and made them look good people, look like they're horrible people. So let's band together to end that.
And have some faith. If it goes through, we will help fight to smooth out the edges and get mom and pops back involved.